Donors used the front entrance. Staff used the side hall. Victoria Langford didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. The sentence landed hard enough to stop the entire hospital lobby. A volunteer paused with a tray of sparkling water. 2 nurses near the check-in desk froze mid-step. Phones began to lift one by one, subtle at first, then openly, because everyone in the bright glass atrium understood something ugly had just happened. Naomi Carter stood at the base of the staircase leading to the new pediatric wing, one hand resting lightly on the strap of her charcoal handbag, her expression unreadable. She wore a fitted navy coat, low heels, and the kind of composure that made chaos look loud. Behind Victoria, the giant gold letters mounted above the polished marble wall gleamed under the chandelier light. Langford Family Pediatric Wing. Reporters were setting up near the ribbon. Donors clustered around white floral displays. Parents from the Children's Cancer Unit had been invited to sit in the front rows. Their faces turned toward the scene now, watching. Victoria smiled without warmth and shifted just enough to block the staircase completely. Her cream suit sharp, her diamond bracelet catching the light every time she moved her hand. "This event is private," she said, louder now, making sure the nearest guests could hear. "We worked very hard to create a certain standard here today." The administrator beside her, Daniel Reeves, glanced down at the guest list tablet and then back up too quickly, as if he already knew he was about to make the coward's choice. Naomi reached into her coat pocket and calmly produced a white invitation card with an embossed seal. "My name is on the list," she said. Her voice was low, even almost too calm for the room. That calm only made Victoria sharper. "That's impossible," she said, with a short laugh that invited others to join her. A few did. Not many, but enough. This wing wasn't built for people wandering in off the street because they found a nice coat and a printed card. A hush rippled outward. Daniel took the card, checked the screen, and for one brief second the color changed in his face. He had seen the name. Naomi Carter. Verified. Approved. But Victoria leaned in before he could speak, her voice coated in donor confidence. "Daniel, please. We do not have time for confusion right before the press walkthrough." The word confusion hung there like a verdict. Naomi did not reach for her card. She did not defend herself. She only lifted her eyes past Victoria's shoulder and studied the gold lettering over the staircase, then the framed rendering of the wing displayed on an easel near the entrance. Children's rooms, family suites, research labs, a legacy project, a photo opportunity, a monument to generosity at least on the surface. "Security," Victoria said, with a polished smile that never touched her eyes. "Let's keep the entrance clear." A guard took one uncertain step forward, then stopped when Naomi asked a quiet question that almost disappeared beneath the chandelier music. "Who approved the naming rights after Clause 8b? Daniel's hand tightened around the tablet. Victoria's smile flickered, only for a second, but Naomi saw it, and so did the young nurse nearest the stairs, who slowly lowered her water tray and stared at Naomi like she was no longer looking at a woman being denied entry, but at someone who had just walked into the room with the power to change what everyone thought this day was about. Daniel Reeves tried to recover first. Men like him always did. He cleared his throat, adjusted the cuff of his tailored gray suit, and forced a smile that looked thinner now under the chandelier lights. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, glancing at the screen in his hand before locking it again. "There may be a small administrative mix-up. If you would not mind waiting in the side lounge, we can sort this out quietly." Quietly. Naomi heard the word for what it was. Not a solution. A burial. Around them, the lobby kept breathing in short, uncomfortable bursts. Reporters pretended to check their cameras while listening to every word. The parents seated near the ribbon line exchanged glances over folded programs. A boy in a baseball cap, maybe 10 years old, sat beside an 4-pole decorated with superhero stickers and looked from Naomi to the gold letters above the stairs, as if he already understood grown-up hypocrisy better than anyone wanted him to. Victoria gave a soft, practiced laugh and smoothed the front of her cream jacket. "Exactly," she said. "There is no need to make this bigger than it is." But that was the problem. She already had. Naomi turned her eyes from Daniel's face to the digital event board standing beside the staircase. It cycled through smiling renderings of the new pediatric wing. Bright rooms, soft blue walls, family sleep suites, research expansion. Then the donor slide returned, and there it was again in gold script over white marble. A gift of hope from the Langford family. Naomi let the image settle. Then she looked at Daniel again. "You verified my name," she said. It was not a question. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around the tablet. Victoria cut in before he could answer. "Daniel verifies hundreds of names. That does not mean every person belongs at the front of an event like this." The last part she delivered with a small turn of her head, just enough to include the nearest cluster of guests. A few shifted. No one stepped in. Naomi noticed everything. The donor committee badges. The vice chair from St. Mark Foundation whispering to her husband. The young nurse at the staircase still watching, no longer pretending not to. The security guard had stopped moving altogether. Even he knew the moment had changed shape. Victoria mistook that pause for victory. She stepped closer to Naomi, close enough for her perfume to carry, and lowered her voice just enough to sound intimate while still being overheard. "You should take the administrator's offer," she said. "This is a celebration. Families are here. Children are here. Do not turn yourself into a spectacle." Naomi almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, she tilted her head and looked past Victoria toward the plaque stand still covered with a white silk cloth, waiting for the official unveiling. "How long did it take to approve the final donor naming package?" she asked. Daniel blinked. Victoria's expression sharpened. "I am not discussing internal hospital matters with someone who was not invited into this room." Naomi's gaze moved back to Daniel, not Victoria. "Then you should know Clause 8B was triggered at 8:14 this morning. Which means if that cloth comes off in front of the press, everyone in this lobby is going to watch your hospital unveil a name it no longer has the legal right to display." The sentence did not land all at once. It moved through the room in stages. First Daniel, then the vice chair, then the reporters. A whisper broke near the floral arch. Victoria laughed again, but this time came a fraction too late. "That is absurd," she said. "You have no idea what you are talking about." Naomi reached into her bag, drew out her phone, and woke the screen with one smooth touch. She did not raise it. She did not wave it around. She only looked at Daniel as the first line of the email reflected in her eyes. "Then why?" she asked softly. "Did your legal office reply to me 7 minutes ago?" For the first time since Naomi had stepped into the lobby, Daniel Reeves stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. The polished administrator mask slipped right off his face, leaving behind something thinner and far more honest. Fear. It showed first in his eyes, then in the way his shoulders drew tight beneath his suit jacket, as if the air itself had changed weight. He looked at Naomi's phone, then at the covered plaque near the staircase, then back at Victoria Langford, who was still smiling too hard to be safe. "Let me see that," Daniel said, holding out his hand. Naomi did not surrender the phone immediately. She studied him for a second that felt longer than it was, then turned the screen just enough for him to read the sender line. Office of General Counsel, St. Aurora Medical Center. Timestamp, 8:14 a.m. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came out. Victoria noticed. Her smile thinned. "Daniel," she said, with the sharp patience of a woman used to rooms folding around her. "Do not let someone with a forged email hijack this event. We are 5 minutes from the ribbon." 5. Naomi lowered the phone again and slipped it back into her bag with calm, measured precision. She did not need to prove anything by waving evidence in the air. Daniel's face had already done that for her. Around them, the room had gone quiet in a different way now. This was no longer the hush of people watching a woman be dismissed. It was the hush of people sensing the floor beneath a polished event beginning to shift. A camera lens turned away from the floral arch and pointed fully at Victoria. Another followed. Then another. Victoria heard it. She did what people like her always did when reality started slipping. She reached for volume. "Everyone, please!" she said brightly, lifting one hand as if she were reclaiming a gala that belonged to her. We are not going to let a disruption overshadow what this wing means for the children. The word children worked on some people. Naomi saw a few guests soften, unsure again. Victoria stepped into that uncertainty like it was a spotlight. This hospital has standards, she continued, voice warm on the surface and cold underneath. Standards for access, standards for representation, standards for who handles sensitive moments like this. The message was clear enough without her saying it plainly. Naomi did not belong here. Not at the front. Not near the cameras. Not in the story Victoria had already written. Daniel glanced toward the side hall as if escape might still be possible. Perhaps, he began, forcing his voice steady, we should move this conversation into a private office. Naomi turned her head slightly. So that the people you invited to celebrate generosity do not have to watch what your hospital does with the truth? Daniel said nothing. He could not. Victoria laughed softly and folded her arms. Truth? She repeated. Truth is simple. My family funded this wing. My family saved this expansion. My family made today possible. Naomi let the words settle. She watched them land on the marble, on the donors, on the reporters, on the parents in the front row. Then she looked up at the giant gold letters over the stairs. That is what you believe, she said. No edge, no heat, just a sentence laid down flat and clean. The nurse by the staircase took one step closer without meaning to. A reporter near the left column lowered his microphone, suddenly more interested in the answer than the ceremony. Victoria lifted her chin. No, that is what the contract says. Naomi's eyes finally returned to her. Then you have not read the final version. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. That was all. Just one brief, helpless blink. But in a room this tense, it was enough. Victoria saw it too, and something inside her sharpened into panic dressed as anger. Daniel, she snapped, dropping the polished donor voice entirely. Tell security to remove her now. The guard did not move. Not this time. He looked at Daniel instead. Everyone did. And Daniel Reeves, the man who had spent the entire morning trying to keep donors happy, stared at the covered plaque, stared at the event board, stared at the staircase with the name already doomed above it, and realized that in front of cameras, donors, patients, and his own staff, the next sentence out of his mouth would decide which side of this disaster the hospital would be remembered standing on. Daniel Reeves swallowed once, and the sound seemed louder than the chandelier music. He looked at the guard, looked at the reporters, then finally looked at Victoria Langford with the exhausted eyes of a man who had just realized the script in his head had burned down in public. No one is removing anyone, he said, but the sentence came out thin, fragile, nothing like the firm authority he had hoped to project all morning. Victoria turned toward him so sharply that even the diamonds at her wrist seemed to flash with offense. Excuse me? She asked. The word was smooth, but only on the outside. Underneath it was steel. Daniel tried again. Until legal confirms the status of the naming agreement, this event cannot move forward as planned. That did it. The room changed all over again. Not loudly, not with gasps, with silence. Deep, expensive silence. The kind that only happens when wealthy people realize a public celebration might become a public embarrassment. A woman from the donor committee lowered her champagne flute without taking a sip. One of the reporters stepped sideways for a clearer angle. The boy in the baseball cap near the front row leaned forward in his wheelchair, eyes fixed on the white silk cloth covering the plaque as if the whole building had suddenly turned into a game no one else knew the rules to. Victoria laughed, but now it sounded borrowed. You are postponing a pediatric wing opening because of one woman with an attitude and a phone? Naomi did not react to the insult. She stood exactly where she had been, still and centered, as if the entire lobby had to move around her now. Not because of me, she said. Because your hospital attached a public promise to private money without honoring the conditions that came with it. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, and that was all the confirmation the room needed. Victoria saw it too. Her face held for one beat, then tightened. What conditions? She demanded. turning toward Naomi with a smile that had lost every trace of grace. Say it clearly if you are so eager to perform. Naomi's eyes moved past her again, to the event board still cycling old renderings and donor slides. The matching fund ethics clause, she said. The one that voids naming rights if discriminatory conduct by a lead donor creates reputational harm to the institution before formal dedication. The sentence landed like cold glass. Not everyone understood it immediately, but the people who mattered did. The vice chair from St. Mark Foundation stopped whispering and went still. A man from hospital communications lowered his headset and stared at Daniel. The nurse by the staircase did not blink. Victoria folded her arms harder. That is ridiculous. No donor agreement in this city gives a stranger the power to erase a family name from a building. Naomi finally looked directly at her. I am not a stranger to the agreement. Daniel's tablet buzzed in his hand. He looked down and went pale all over again. A second email. Then a call. His thumb shook as he silenced both. Reporters noticed. Of course they did. Daniel, Victoria said. Each syllable clipped now. Answer me. He did not. He was reading. Naomi let him read. That was part of the punishment. Not a scene. Not a shout. The truth arriving in writing while cameras rolled. Somewhere near the back of the lobby, a volunteer accidentally set down a tray too hard. The small clink echoed like a mistake no one could hide. Then Daniel lifted his head. The board has frozen the unveiling, he said. He did not say it to Victoria alone. He said it to the room, to the cameras, to the frightened communications staff, to the parents in folding chairs, to the giant gold letters still hanging above the staircase like a lie waiting to be removed. Victoria's composure cracked down the middle. The board would not do that without consulting me. Naomi's expression did not change. They already did. Victoria took one step toward Daniel, then stopped when she saw what was on his screen. The sender line this time was not legal. It was the board chair. Harold Whitmore. Urgent. Hold event. Do not unveil plaque. Conference call in 3 minutes. Victoria stared at the words as if they had been written in another language. Naomi adjusted the strap on her bag and glanced once more toward the covered plaque. You should leave it covered, she said quietly, because if that cloth comes off now, it will not be your family name people remember. It will be the moment everyone in this hospital watched it come off the wall before it ever belonged there. The lobby did not explode. Compressed. That was somehow worse. Sound pulled inward. Conversations died mid-breath. Even the soft music drifting down from the mezzanine suddenly felt foolish, like a string quartet had wandered into the wrong kind of funeral. Victoria Langford stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Daniel's tablet, waiting for the screen to change into something more useful to her. It did not. Harold Whitmore's message remained there in blunt black letters, stripped of ceremony, stripped of donor charm, stripped of every polite illusion money usually bought. Hold event. Do not unveil plaque. Conference call in 3 minutes. Victoria blinked once, then lifted her chin with the kind of control that came from years of surviving public rooms by refusing to acknowledge reality until it bent first. This is temporary, she said, turning just enough for the nearest guests and cameras to catch her profile. A procedural pause. Nothing more. Naomi Carter did not answer. She did not need to. The room had already started reading the truth off faces now, and Daniel Reeves was the weakest page in the building. His mouth pressed into a hard line. His hand hovered over the tablet as if he wanted to turn it off but did not trust himself to move. One of the hospital communications staff stepped toward him and whispered, "What do we tell the press?" Daniel stared past him at the silk-covered plaque, then said the only thing he could say without making it worse. Tell them the unveiling has been delayed pending board review. Delayed. The word moved fast. A reporter repeated it into her phone. Another typed it into a live update. The donor committee woman near the floral arch turned to her husband and whispered something that included the words ethics clause and naming rights. Victoria heard enough to know the room was no longer hers. That was when she made her mistake. She stepped away from the staircase, away from the plaque, and toward Naomi with a smile so polished it had become frightening. You have made your point, she said, keeping her voice low for the cameras but not low enough to hide the edge. Now tell Daniel whatever game you are playing so this hospital can get back to what matters. Naomi looked at her for a long second, calm as ever. What matters, she said quietly, is that children needed a wing. You needed a monument. Victoria's smile broke for half a second, came back but thinner. Careful, she said. You are speaking to the woman who wrote the largest check this hospital has seen in 20 years. Naomi's eyes did not leave hers. No, she said. You pledged the largest check. Those are not the same thing. Daniel shut his eyes again, this time longer. Around them, heads lifted. The sentence hit exactly where it needed to. Pledged. Not transferred. Not cleared. Not secured. Pledged. A reporter near the left column looked down at his notes and then back up so fast he nearly dropped his pen. The nurse by the staircase covered her mouth. Victoria turned on Daniel at once. Tell her that is false. Daniel did not answer quickly enough. In rooms like this, delay was confession. Naomi reached into her bag, drew out a slim folder, and held it at her side without opening it. The board approved a public naming ceremony before the final escrow condition closed, she said. They did it because they trusted your image more than your compliance. Victoria's breathing changed. Tiny but visible. Who are you? She asked, and this time there was no performance left in it. Only anger wrapped around uncertainty. Naomi glanced toward the staircase, toward the gold letters still shining over a wing that had not officially opened, then back at Victoria. I am the person, she said, who told them not to put your name on that wall until the money and the conduct matched the promise. The conference room doors at the end of the lobby opened. Harold Whitmore had not arrived in person, but his chief of staff had, moving quickly with two members of legal and expressions that made celebration impossible. And for the first time that morning, Victoria Langford looked not insulted, not annoyed, not even angry. She looked left behind. The chief of staff did not slow down when she entered the lobby. That alone told everyone enough. People with good news smiled on approach. She did not. Her navy folder was tucked tight under one arm, her expression clipped into pure function as legal counsel followed 2 steps behind her. They moved past the floral displays, past the waiting photographers, past the silk-covered plaque, and stopped directly beside Daniel Reeves. No greeting, no donor small talk, no apology wrapped in ceremony. Daniel, she said low and clear, the board chair is on secure conference now. Legal needs the event materials, donor packet, and the final naming agreement immediately. Every eye in the lobby turned again, not to Naomi this time, but to Victoria Langford. She stood with her hands loosely folded, trying to hold on to elegance the way a person grips a railing after missing a step. This is absurd, she said. I have not been informed of any conference. The chief of staff finally looked at her. Not warmly, not rudely, worse, professionally. That is correct, she said. You were not. The sentence sliced the air clean in two. A donor near the back quietly stepped away from Victoria, as if distance might protect reputation by association alone. Naomi Carter remained still, her bag at her side, her expression calm in that exact way that made everyone else feel increasingly loud. Daniel handed over the tablet with fingers that no longer tried to hide their tremor. One of the attorneys opened the folder in the chief of staff's hand and began checking dates, signatures, conditional language. Escrow not confirmed, he murmured. Conduct clause active. Board discretion preserved. The words were not dramatic, but in that room they hit harder than shouting ever could. Victoria turned sharply toward Daniel. You told me the ceremony was locked. Daniel could not meet her eyes. I said the schedule was locked, he answered, and even to his own ears the distinction sounded small and cowardly. Victoria laughed once, but there was no audience for it now. This is because of her, she said, pointing at Naomi with a hand that had finally lost its steady polish. You are letting one woman derail a pediatric expansion over a misunderstanding in a lobby. Naomi's gaze moved to the child in the baseball cap near the front row, then to the parents seated beside him, then back to Victoria. No, she said softly. I am stopping a hospital from teaching those families that money can buy humiliation and still get a building named after it. Silence answered her. Not because the room disagreed, because it did not. The chief of staff opened the folder to the final page and looked at Naomi for the first time with something close to recognition. Miss Carter, she said. The board chair would like confirmation from the foundation before he proceeds. Victoria blinked. Foundation. The word landed visibly. Her face changed in stages, disbelief first, then calculation, then something colder. What foundation? She asked. But the question had already arrived too late. Naomi reached into her bag and withdrew a slim cream envelope embossed with a seal so understated most people would have missed its weight if they did not know what they were looking at. The St. Aurora Children's Futures Foundation. The matching fund behind the wing. The real money. The stabilizing money. The money that turned pledges into steel, glass, research suites, and pediatric beds. Naomi handed the letter to the chief of staff. Not Daniel, not legal, not Victoria. My office sent withdrawal notice at 8:14, she said. My personal confirmation is attached. Victoria stared at the envelope as if it had just erased the floor under her shoes. Your office, she repeated. Naomi met her eyes at last. I am Naomi Carter, she said, voice quiet and exact. President of the foundation that made this wing possible. And after what happened in this lobby, I made sure your family name would not be the one attached to it. The sentence did not echo. Settled. That was worse. Naomi Carter stood in the center of the hospital lobby with the foundation seal now out in the open, and everything that had looked permanent an hour ago suddenly felt rented. The gold letters above the staircase still gleamed. The floral arch still framed the covered plaque. The reporters were still in place. But the power in the room had moved, clean and complete, and everybody knew it. Victoria Langford did not speak at first. She stared at Naomi as if the woman she had blocked at the entrance had somehow changed species in front of her. Then the denial arrived, polished by habit and sharpened by panic. No, she said with a tight smile. No, this is not how this works. My family has been in every planning session for this wing. Every one. We selected the concept. We approved the public art. We hosted the donor dinner. You do not get to walk in here and erase that because your feelings were hurt. Naomi did not blink. This is not about my feelings, she said. It is about your behavior. Victoria turned to the chief of staff as if the right audience might restore the old world. Tell her the board cannot revoke naming rights over one unpleasant exchange. The chief of staff opened Naomi's letter, read the final page, and answered without drama. The board can suspend unveiling, revoke provisional naming status, and reopen allocation review if the lead matching partner withdraws under the ethics clause. She paused just long enough for the words to finish their work. The lead matching partner has withdrawn. A murmur broke across the lobby. Not loud, just enough. The reporters no longer pretended to be there for ribbon shots. Cameras were aimed straight at Victoria now, and she knew it. Daniel Reeves took one step back as if distance might save him from the blast radius of his own cowardice. The nurse by the staircase looked from Naomi to the covered plaque with a kind of quiet awe. Even the boy in the baseball cap seemed to understand that something much bigger than a ceremony was unfolding in front of him. Victoria's voice rose, not enough to shout, but enough to lose class. Daniel, say something. He swallowed hard. The board will need to reconvene on naming designation. It was the most bureaucratic way possible to say her family name was already halfway off the wall. Victoria's face tightened. After everything we did for this hospital? Naomi's gaze moved to the parents in the front row, then to the child beside the four-pole, then back to Victoria. What you did, she said quietly, was make a public promise before you finished a private obligation, and then you used your status to humiliate the wrong person at the wrong door on the wrong day. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Victoria laughed once, but the sound came out brittle. You expect them to hand this wing over to you now? Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her navy coat with calm, measured fingers. No, she said. I expect them to give it back to the children before they give it to anyone's ego. that hit harder than legal language. It changed the room in a way contracts never could. Faces that had been nervous turned thoughtful. Faces that had been impressed turned embarrassed. The chief of staff handed the foundation letter to legal. One of the attorneys nodded to Daniel. Another signaled quietly to hospital communications. Across the lobby, the digital event board flickered. The slide with Victoria's family name vanished. For one suspended second, the screen went black. Then a plain holding message appeared in white letters over a blue background. Dedication ceremony postponed pending board review. Victoria saw it and went completely still. Naomi saw it too. But unlike Victoria, she did not look shocked. She looked like someone who had been patient long enough to let the truth arrive right on time. The screen going black should have been enough. For most people, it would have been. A postponed dedication in front of reporters, donors, parents, and hospital staff would have sent anyone with sense into silence. But Victoria Langford had built too much of herself on the belief that rooms could be bullied back into obedience if she stayed standing long enough. She looked at the holding message on the event board, then at the covered plaque, then at Naomi Carter with a face gone pale beneath perfect makeup. When she finally spoke, her voice came out low and sharp, the polished donor tone stripped down to something meaner. "You think this makes you noble?" she asked. "You think humiliating a family that stepped up when this hospital needed money makes you some kind of protector?" Naomi did not answer right away. That silence did more damage than any speech could have. Victoria mistook it for hesitation and took another step forward, desperate now to regain even 1 inch of ground. "This wing exists because people like me write checks while people like you make speeches about fairness." The words landed badly, not because they were louder than before, but because the room had already changed sides. The parents in the front row heard them. The nurses heard them. The legal team heard them. The reporters definitely heard them. Naomi's eyes moved across the lobby slowly, taking in every witness, every camera, every face that had watched the entire thing unfold from the moment she was denied at the entrance. Then she looked back at Victoria and spoke in the same calm voice she had used from the beginning. "People like me," she said, "built the funding model that kept this project alive after your family missed its second transfer deadline." Victoria's mouth parted, but no words came out. Daniel Reeves looked down so fast it was almost painful to watch. That single reaction gave the sentence its weight. Naomi did not need to press. The truth was already walking through the room on its own now. The chief of staff handed another page to legal, and one of the attorneys quietly asked Daniel for the escrow ledger. He did not argue. He did not stall. He just turned and called for it, voice thin, because at this point refusing would only make the cameras stay longer. Victoria looked around the lobby as if searching for one loyal face and finding none. "This is a funding delay," she said, trying to recover shape from collapse. "A timing issue. That does not erase our contribution." Naomi nodded once. "No," she said. "Your contribution is in the record. So is your conduct. The board can see both now." That was the moment Victoria realized this was no longer a private humiliation. It was an institutional one. Not one person against another, but reputation against documentation. She turned toward the covered plaque as if she could still protect it by standing near it. She could not. 2 members of hospital facilities had appeared at the edge of the staircase, summoned quietly by communications. They did not touch the plaque yet. They simply waited, hands folded, eyes on Daniel. The image alone was enough. The room saw what was coming before anyone announced it. A reporter near the floral arch whispered into her microphone, "Possible removal of donor naming before unveiling." Another sent out a live update. Phones rose higher. Victoria saw them all. "You cannot do this," she said. But now the sentence sounded smaller, almost personal, as if she finally understood that the building had never loved her back. Naomi glanced toward the children seated in the front row, toward the unfinished promise shining in polished marble and silk, then back to Victoria. "Watch them," she said softly. "That is who this wing should have been about from the start." Daniel's phone rang again. He looked at the screen, straightened a fraction, and answered with both hands. He listened for less than 20 seconds, then said, "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Understood." When he lowered the phone, every eye in the lobby fixed on him. Even Victoria did not speak. Daniel swallowed once and turned toward facilities. "Do not unveil the plaque," he said. Then, after one last look at the gold letters over the staircase, he added, "And prepare to remove the temporary donor display immediately." The order landed harder than applause ever could. "Do not unveil the plaque. Prepare to remove the temporary donor display immediately." Daniel Reeves said it into the hush of the lobby, and this time his voice did not shake. Maybe because there was nothing left to protect. Maybe because once a room has seen the truth, pretending becomes heavier than surrender. 2 facility staff members moved at once. Not hurried, not dramatic, just efficient. One stepped toward the staircase and quietly unplugged the freestanding donor display near the floral arch. The screen went dark. The other approached the gold letter presentation board that had framed the entrance all morning, lifted it from its easel, and turned it sideways so the cameras could no longer catch the Langford family name head-on. It was a small motion, felt enormous. Victoria Langford made a sound then, not quite a gasp, not quite a protest. More like someone hearing a door close in a house they thought they owned. "You cannot be serious," she said, but the sentence had no force behind it now. Nobody rushed to reassure her. Nobody softened the moment. Not Daniel. Not legal. Not the chief of staff. Not the donors who had spent the last 10 minutes inching away from her as if status could be contagious in reverse. Naomi Carter stood where she had always stood, composed and still, watching the hospital choose, at last, to act like an institution instead of a stage prop for wealthy vanity. The chief of staff received one final message on her phone, read it, then handed it to Daniel. He nodded once and turned toward the room. "The board chair has suspended all naming discussions pending a full review of donor compliance, escrow completion, and conduct standards," he said. He paused, then added the line that would survive the day longer than anything else. "This wing will open for children when it is ready to honor them." Not a headline. That did it. The room shifted one final time. The parents in the front row, who had sat through the whole spectacle with careful silence, began to clap first. Not loudly, just enough. A mother near the aisle, the father beside her, then the young nurse at the staircase, then another staff member. The sound spread awkwardly, honestly, until it filled the marble lobby with something that had been missing all morning. Not celebration. Relief. Victoria looked around as if applause had betrayed some natural law. Her face had gone beyond anger now. Anger still expected leverage. This was emptier than that. Reporters were no longer filming Naomi as the woman who had been denied entry. They were filming Victoria as the donor whose name had just started disappearing before the ribbon was ever cut. Daniel turned toward Naomi with the formal stiffness of a man who knew his apology would never be enough but had to be made anyway. "Miss Carter," he said in front of everyone, "on behalf of St. Aurora Medical Center, I owe you a public apology. You were treated with disrespect in a building that should have known better." Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then glanced toward the children's seating area, toward the waiting staircase, toward the covered plaque that would stay covered. "Make the apology useful," she said quietly. "Open the wing when the funding is clean, the name is earned, and every family who walks through those doors knows dignity is not something they have to qualify for." Daniel nodded. This time he looked like he meant it. Victoria took one last step toward the staircase, as if proximity alone could restore what had been lost. But even she stopped when she saw the facilities team standing by the temporary signage with gloves and tools, waiting for final clearance. Her name was already halfway out of the room. Naomi adjusted the strap of her bag and started toward the front row instead of the stairs, moving past reporters, past donors, past the wreckage of a ceremony built on the wrong kind of power. She stopped beside the boy in the baseball cap and crouched just enough to meet his eyes. "You still getting that new room?" he asked softly, like he needed one true thing before the day ended. Naomi smiled then, the first real smile anyone had seen from her all morning. "Yes," she said, "but now it is going to belong to the kids first." Then she rose, and as the cameras followed her across the lobby, Victoria Langford stood beneath a blank wall, finally understanding what Naomi had known from the beginning. She had thought she was blocking one black woman from entering a wing. In truth, she had blocked herself from the legacy she was trying to buy, and the hospital had chosen to watch it happen in full view of everyone.